The wood shavings curled from her knife in pale ribbons, falling onto her lap like shed skin, and Lyra could feel by the grain's resistance that this piece of birch had a knot near the left ear of the wolf she was carving. Her fingers found the floor, traced its raised edge, and she adjusted the blade angle the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her eyes at 7 years old. Around her, the late morning sounds of Ashmere village drifted in through the open window of the woodshed. Children laughing near the well, the clang of the farrier's hammer, the smell of boiled oats from the communal kitchen, where she was no longer welcome to eat until everyone else had finished. She was 23. She had been blind for 16 years, and in all that time she had never once carved a wolf that looked wrong to the children who received them. That was the part no one in the village could explain, so they had stopped trying and started resenting her for it instead. Her stomach pulled tight against her spine. She had not eaten since yesterday's bread heel, the one the baker's wife left on the woodshed step every 3rd morning. Not out of kindness exactly. More like the way you might leave water for a stray cat, enough to keep it alive. Not enough to make it yours. The totem was nearly finished. A wolf mid-howl head, tipped back, jaws parted. She ran her thumb along the muzzle, checking the proportions. The brow ridge was sharp. The cheekbones sat high and angular beneath the fur she'd textured with a fine chisel. The jaw was wide, strong, tapering to a squared chin that was more human than wolf if you looked closely enough. She always carved them this way. Every single one. The door of the woodshed slammed open hard enough to rattle the shelves where her finished totems waited in rows. The smell hit her first. Stale ale and the sour leather of a jerkin that had never been properly cured. Declan, the Beta's eldest son. Still making your little dolls blind, Lyra? She did not look up. Looking up meant nothing to her, but she had learned that the motion of her sightless eyes unsettled people, made them angry, as if her blindness was something she was doing at them. The children asked for more, she said. The autumn equinox festival is in 2 days. The children asked. He snorted. His boots scraped closer. She could feel the vibration through the packed earth floor. You know what my father says about you and these totems? She knew. Beta Hask had said it loudly enough at last month's pack gathering for every wolf in Ashmere to hear, that a blind Omega had no business shaping wolves, that her carvings were unnatural, that no one with dead eyes should be putting faces on sacred forms. What Hask never said, because it would mean admitting weakness, was that Lyra's totems calmed the pups during their first shift. The village healer had noticed it years ago. A child clutching one of Lyra's wolves would shift with less pain, less terror. The wood seemed to hold warmth longer than it should. My father wants you out of this shed by nightfall, Declan said. Her knife paused. This is my mother's shed. Your mother's been dead 9 years, and Omegas don't own property in this pack. You know that. She did know that. The knowing settled in her chest like a stone in still water. She resumed carving. Declan's hand closed around her wrist. His grip was not cruel, exactly. That was the worst part about Declan. He was never quite cruel enough for anyone to intervene, never quite kind enough to be trusted. His fingers pressed the bones of her wrist together until her hand opened and the half-finished totem dropped to the floor. Are you listening to me? I hear everything, Declan. That is what happens when you cannot see. He released her. She heard him pick up the fallen totem, turn it in his hands. A long silence. Why do they all have the same face? He asked. His voice had changed, quieter, almost uncertain. They're wolves. Wolves have wolf faces. No. He set it back on her workbench with a carefulness that surprised her. No, they don't. Not like this. My sister collected 6 of yours growing up. I lined them up once. Same jaw, same brow, same exact expression, like the wolf is looking at something it can't believe it found. He paused. Who is he, Lyra? The question made no sense to her. She carved what her hands knew, what her fingers remembered, what came when she closed her useless eyes and let the wood decide. It's just a wolf, she said. But Declan was already leaving, and the draft from the open door carried something new on the wind, something that made every hair on her arms rise. Pine resin smoke, and underneath it, a scent like the moment before a winter storm breaks. Ozone and cold iron. The Alpha King's convoy had arrived in Ashmere. She had heard the rumors for weeks. King Cale Voss of the Thornhold Dominion was touring the border packs. No one knew exactly why. Some said he was assessing defenses against the southern rogue clans. Others whispered he was searching for something, or someone. Lyra gathered her carving tools by touch, wrapping them in their leather roll with practiced speed. She tucked the unfinished totem into the pocket of her apron, the wood still warm from her hands. She needed to disappear. When important wolves visited Ashmere, Beta Hask always made sure Lyra was nowhere visible. A blind Omega reflected poorly on pack strength. She was a crack in the image of vitality that Hask polished like a mirror every time outsiders came. She knew the back route to the forest edge, 37 steps from the shed door to the gap in the fence behind the tanners, another 60 to the birch grove, where the ground went soft and mossy, and the village sounds dimmed to nothing. She made it to step 29. The convoy must have entered from the east gate instead of the south. She heard the horses, first big war horses, by the weight of their hoofbeats, not the shaggy ponies Ashmere bred. Then the creak of a carriage, voices calling out orders in clipped, unfamiliar accents. And then the wind shifted. It hit her like a wall of warm water. The pine and ozone scent intensified until it was no longer a smell, but a physical pressure against her skin, a vibration in her teeth, a hum in the hollow of her throat. Her wolf, the wolf that had never once manifested the wolf that the pack healer had declared dead at her first shift ceremony when nothing happened, and she had stood there with her blind eyes leaking tears, while Beta Hask announced to the gathered pack that she was wolfless. That wolf stirred. Not stirred. Roared. Lyra staggered. Her hand found the tanner's fence and gripped it, the rough-hewn wood biting into her palm. Her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Something inside her was rearranging itself. Some internal architecture she had never known existed was suddenly groaning under a weight it had waited its whole life to bear. Mate. The word arrived in her mind with a certainty that had no logic to it. It was not a thought. It was a fact, like gravity, like the knowledge that fire burns. She turned. She had no reason to turn. She could not see what was behind her. But she turned anyway, and the scent grew stronger, and she heard bootfalls, heavy ones, measured. The stride of someone who had never once hurried because the world arranged itself around his pace. The bootfalls stopped, 6 feet away. She could tell by the angle of the sound, the displacement of air. Whoever it was stood tall enough to block the wind that had been touching the right side of her face. Who carved this? The voice was low, not quiet. Low the way thunder is low when it is directly above you. She could feel it in her sternum. It took her a moment to understand the question. Then she heard the faint sound of wood being turned. He was holding one of her totems. She had left 3 on the windowsill of the shed to dry. He must have passed the shed. He must have picked one up. I did, she said. And then, because the pack protocol was so deeply trained, it came even before fear. My lord. Silence. 6 feet of charged breathing silence. You're blind. Not a question. An observation made with the same flat precision as his question about the carving. Yes. What is your name? Lyra. Of no bloodline. Omega. Lyra of no bloodline. He repeated it the way you might repeat a word in a foreign language, tasting its shape. Look at me. I can't. I know. Look at me anyway. She raised her face. She could not see him. She had never been able to see anything since the fever. But she aimed her blind eyes at where the voice came from, and felt the exact moment his gaze met hers, because the mate bond clenched in her chest like a fist closing around something precious and fragile, and a sound came from the man in front of her that she had never heard a wolf make. A low, broken rumble, half growl, half something else, the sound of a predator recognizing its equal. Who is the alpha of this pack? His voice had not changed volume, but the texture was different, rougher, as if something behind it was pressing against the words. Beta Hask leads Ashmere, my lord. We have no alpha. The last one died in the border wars. Get him. She heard one of his soldiers take off at a run. The boot falls drew closer. 5 feet. 4. The scent was so thick now, she could taste it on her tongue, pine and ozone, and something warm underneath, like sun-heated stone. This totem, he said, and she heard him hold it up, though the gesture was wasted on her. The face of this wolf. Where did you see it? I don't see anything, my lord. I carve what my hands know. Your hands know my face. The words fell between them like a blade into wood. She felt her breath catch. Her fingers tightened on the fence post. That's not possible, she whispered. I have stood in front of a mirror every morning for 31 years, the Alpha King said. I know the topography of my own skull, the brow ridge, the jaw, the scar over the left eye that I got at 14 from a rogue's claw. Your wolf carved it into birchwood with a 1/4-inch chisel, and you did it blind. She shook her head. The motion felt mechanical. I carve wolves. For the children. They're just wolves. They are not just wolves. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat of his body. Not touching, but close enough that the air between them felt compressed, charged. How many have you carved? I don't know. Hundreds, since I was 11. Hundreds. That broken rumble again. You have carved my face hundreds of times, and you do not even know what I look like. She had no answer. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. The world she understood, the small, dark, manageable world of the woodshed, and the back roots, and the 37 steps, was cracking open. My lord, I am an Omega. I have no wolf. I have no eyes. I don't know why the carvings look the way they look, but it means nothing. It means everything. His hand found her chin. Not roughly. His fingers were calloused, the pads thick with old sword scars, and they tilted her face up with a gentleness that made her throat tight. Your wolf is not dead, Lyra of no bloodline. I can feel her. She has been calling mine across a distance I cannot fathom, and she has been using your hands to do it. Behind them, the sound of running feet. Hask's voice, breathless, obsequious. King Voss, your Majesty, we are honored beyond measure. Forgive us, we expected your arrival from the south gate and the preparations. Who is responsible for this woman? Hask's breathing hitched. She could hear him recalculating. The blind one she is. She is a ward of the pack, my lord, an Omega. No family. We have sheltered her out of charity. Charity. The word came out of the Alpha King like something scraped along bone. She is starving. I can count her ribs through her dress. Her wrist is bruised, and you have her living in a woodshed. My lord, I assure you. Where are her belongings? Hask stammered. The shed, I suppose. She has very little. Collect them, all of them. Every carving tool, every piece of wood, every finished totem. Bring them to my carriage. Your Majesty, I don't understand. You will. Lyra felt his hand leave her chin. She felt the loss of contact, like a door slamming shut in a warm room. She comes with me, the Alpha King said. And then to her quieter in a voice that was somehow both command and question, unless you refuse. She should have refused. Every instinct hammered into her by 16 years of pack hierarchy told her to kneel, to defer, to let Beta Hask handle this to be invisible. She was an Omega. She owned nothing. She was nothing. But her wolf, the wolf that had never manifested, was pressing against the inside of her skin so hard she could feel her bones humming with it. And the scent of pine and ozone was the only thing that had ever made the permanent darkness behind her eyes feel like something other than a prison. I have an unfinished totem, she said, in my apron pocket. I'd like to finish it. She heard the Alpha King exhale. Not a laugh. Something warmer than a laugh. You can finish it in the carriage, he said. The interior of the king's carriage smelled like oiled leather and cedar. The seats were upholstered in something dense and smooth, not quite velvet, more like brushed suede. Lyra sat with her back straight, and her carving tools in her lap, and her hands absolutely still, because if she moved them, she was afraid they would shake. The Alpha King sat across from her. She could feel his presence the way you feel the heat of a bonfire. Constant, impossible to ignore. They had been traveling for 2 hours. The road had shifted from the rutted dirt tracks around Ashmere to something paved, the carriage wheels humming steadily instead of jolting. His soldiers rode alongside. She could hear the rhythmic clink of their armor. He had not spoken since giving orders to his captain before departure. Lyra had heard fragments. Her name. The phrase, quarters in the east wing. That word healer. And then in a tone that made his captain's heartbeat audibly quicken, even from 20 feet away, the phrase, if Beta Hask follows this convoy for any reason, treat it as an act of aggression. Now he was silent. She could hear him breathing, steady, slow, controlled. The breathing of someone who was containing something immense. She broke first. She was not proud of this. Why did you take me? You know why. Because of the carvings. Because you are my mate. The word landed in the enclosed space of the carriage and filled every corner of it. She gripped her leather tool roll. I am a blind Omega with no wolf. You are the Alpha King of the Thornhold Dominion. The mate bond makes mistakes. It does not. It must, because this does not make sense. Lyra, he said her name the way her chisel met wood, precise and deliberate. I have been Alpha since I was 19. I have fought in 3 wars. I have killed men who tried to take my throne and stood over their bodies without flinching. My wolf has not settled in 12 years. My council has presented 47 lunar candidates, and my wolf rejected everyone so violently that the last one fled the throne room in tears. I was beginning to believe I was broken. A pause. And then I picked up a wooden wolf from a windowsill in a border village, and my wolf lay down for the first time in 12 years. Lay down, like a pup in front of a fire. She didn't know what to say to that. She turned the unfinished totem over in her hands. The knot in the birch was still there near the left ear. "The scar," she said quietly. "Over the left eye. You said my carvings have it." "They do." "I didn't know it was a scar. I thought it was a flaw in the wood that kept appearing. I always left it because it felt right. Like the face needed it." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. Denser. She heard him shift in his seat, and the leather creaked under his weight, and she realized he was leaning forward. "Your hands know things your mind does not," he said. "That is not the mark of a wolfless Omega. That is the mark of a bond so deep it predates your birth, or the mark of a woman who has carved so many wolves she got stuck in a pattern. You are infuriating." "I am realistic. You are scared." She flinched. He was right, and she hated that he was right. The precision of it stung. She was terrified. Not of him exactly, of what it would mean to believe him, to believe that she was something other than what Ashmere had told her she was for 16 years. She would rather carve than think about it. She pulled the totem from her apron, unrolled her tools, and set the blade against the birch. "May I watch?" he asked. The question startled her. An Alpha King asking permission. "You don't need to ask." "I am asking anyway." She began to carve. The shavings fell onto her lap, pale curls that smelled like sap and green wood. She worked the muzzle first, defining the line of the jaw. Then the brow ridge angled and heavy, the cheekbones high and sharp beneath the textured fur, the scar or the flaw or whatever it was over the left eye. She heard his breath change as she carved it. A slight catch, nothing more. "You feel it," he said. Not a question. "When you carve." She did. She always had. A warmth in her hands that had nothing to do with friction. A sense of rightness, like placing the last piece of a puzzle she couldn't see the picture of. She had assumed it was just what craft felt like when you had practiced long enough. "I feel the wood," she said. "I feel where it wants to go. And it always wants to go to the same face." "Yes, my face." She said nothing. She kept carving. They arrived at Thornhold as the sun was setting. She knew this because the air changed. The wind shifted from the open road smell of cut hay and dust to something denser. Wood smoke roasting meat, the mineral tang of a river nearby. And underneath all of it, the concentrated musk of hundreds of wolves living in close quarters, the largest pack she had ever encountered. The carriage stopped. She heard the gates open, heavy iron by the groan of the hinges, guards calling out greetings. And then the Alpha King's door opened, and he stepped out, and the sounds shifted around him, the way water shifts around a boulder. Conversation stopped, footsteps redirected. "Give me your hand," he said from outside the carriage. "I can manage. I know you can manage. Give me your hand." She reached out. His hand engulfed hers. His palm was broad and warm, the calluses rough against her fingers, and the mate bond sang at the contact. There was no other word for it. A note high and clear that resonated in the hollows of her bones. He helped her down. The ground beneath her feet was cobblestone, smooth and well-fitted. The air smelled of torch smoke and rain-damp stone. "My lord," a woman's voice, sharp, authoritative. "You were expected 3 days ago. The council is assembling." "And who is this?" Commander Sarah Cale said. "This is Lyra. She is my mate." A beat of silence, so complete that Lyra could hear the torches guttering. "Your mate," Commander Sarah repeated. Her tone was not hostile. It was the tone of someone rapidly recalculating logistics. "The blind Omega from the border. Word travels fast, my lord. Your scout sent a hawk 2 hours ago." Then you've had 2 hours to prepare quarters in the East Wing. I have. I also have 47 questions. They will wait. She needs food, a healer, and rest. In that order. My lord. A different voice. Male, older, with the practiced smoothness of someone who spoke for a living. The council has waited 12 years for you to name a Luna. Perhaps we might discuss the protocols before any public announcements. Councillor Thane. Kyle's hand tightened fractionally around Lyra's. I appreciate the suggestion. The answer is no. But the bloodline verification, the wolf assessment, she is my mate. My wolf recognized her. The discussion is over. Lyra felt every gaze on her like a physical weight. She stood in borrowed sandals on the cobblestones of a palace she could not see, holding the hand of a king she had apparently been carving into wood since she was 11, and the absurdity of it threatened to crack her open. I would like to finish my totem, she said, because it was the only true sentence she had. Kale led her inside. The east wing smelled like beeswax and lavender. The bed was wide, the sheets cool and impossibly soft against skin accustomed to a straw pallet. The healer who came was brisk and gentle, a woman named Maren, who smelled like chamomile, and did not ask unnecessary questions. She treated the bruise on Lyra's wrist from where Declan had gripped her applied salve to the calluses on her hands, and listened to her heartbeat with 2 warm fingers pressed to the inside of her elbow. You've been malnourished for a long time, Maren said. Your body has been in survival mode. We'll start with broth and soft bread tonight. Your stomach won't tolerate anything heavier. I can eat anything. You think you can. But your stomach has shrunk to the size of a child's fist. Trust me. The broth came. It was the richest thing Lyra had tasted in years. Bone broth, she guessed, with rosemary and something earthy underneath. She drank it slowly, sitting on the edge of the bed, and felt warmth spread through her body like light through glass. A knock on the door. She knew his scent before the door opened. The healer says you need rest, Kale said from the doorway. He did not enter. I wanted to tell you that your tools and wood have been placed in the room next to this one. I had a workbench brought in. You set up a workshop for me. You said you needed to finish the totem. She turned the empty broth bowl in her hands. The ceramic was glazed smooth warm from the liquid it had held. Why are you being kind to me? Because you are my mate. That's not a reason. That's a biological imperative. Wolves mate because their blood tells them to. Kindness is a choice. She heard him lean against the doorframe. The wood creaked. He was large enough to make a palace doorframe creak. When I was 14, he said, a rogue wolf attacked our border camp. He got close enough to mark me. A pause. After I killed him, I sat on the ground and cried. Not because I was hurt, because I was 14 and I had just killed someone and the blood wouldn't wash off my hands. My father found me. He was the Alpha King before me. He could have told me to stand up, to be strong, to be worthy of the crown. Instead, he sat down next to me on the bloody ground and said nothing. Just sat there. She waited. He died 6 months later. I barely remember his voice, but I remember the sitting. I remember that he chose to come down to where I was, instead of ordering me to come up to where he was. He straightened. The doorframe stopped creaking. Kindness is not a biological imperative, Lyra. You are correct. I am choosing it. He left. She sat with the empty bowl and the residue of broth on her lips, and the scent of pine and ozone fading slowly from the room, and for the first time in 16 years, her blindness felt less like a wall and more like a curtain. Something was behind it. Something was waking up. The days took on a rhythm. Mornings the healer came. Afternoons, Lyra carved. Evenings, the Alpha King visited the doorway of her room, and they talked while he leaned against the frame, and she shaped birchwood with a blade. She learned him in fragments. He governed Thornhold with an iron efficiency that left no room for the theatrical cruelty she had seen in Beta Hask. Disputes were settled quickly, punishments were proportionate, and the pack ran with the smooth precision of a body that trusted its own heartbeat. He had fought in the Ashfall Wars, the Fractured Border campaigns, and the Siege of Kinnock Hollow. His body carried the record of these events. She knew this, not because he told her, but because Maren the healer mentioned offhandedly that the king's last full medical assessment had catalogued 37 scars and 2 bones that had healed crooked. She also learned that his wolf, the beast that had terrorized Luna, candidates and kept the court on edge for 12 years, went silent in her presence. Not dormant, silent. Like a wolf that has finally found the den it was looking for, and has no reason to snarl. He just watches, Cale told her one evening, when I'm near you. He doesn't push, doesn't pace. He watches. What does he watch? Your hands, mostly. When you carve. A pause. He recognizes them. On the 5th day, Commander Sarah came to Lyra's workshop. She knocked once sharp and entered without waiting. She smelled like weapon oil and cedar bark. I need to speak plainly, Sarah said. Most people who say that are about to be rude. Perhaps. Sarah pulled a stool up to the workbench. Lyra heard it scrape across the stone floor. The king has not officially claimed you. No marking, no ceremony, no public declaration beyond the one he made at the gate. The council is using the delay to lobby for a bloodline match instead. Councillor Thane has 3 candidates from noble packs standing ready. I know. You know, voices carry in stone hallways. I've been blind for 16 years, Commander. My ears are very good. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, what are you carving now? A wolf for the healer's daughter. Maren mentioned she's afraid of her first shift. The totems really work, the calming. The children think they do, that's usually enough. The king thinks they do more than calm. He's had his scholars looking into wolf totems. Apparently there's a historical tradition among the Silverpine bloodline. Moon carvers, they were called. Wolves who could channel pack bonds into physical objects. The bloodline was thought to have been wiped out in the purge of the 4 houses 60 years ago. Lyra's knife paused. You're saying I'm from this bloodline? I'm saying the scholars are saying it's possible. A wolf who can carve her alpha's face without ever seeing it, whose carvings ease the pain of first shifts. That's not woodworking. That's a gift. Or a coincidence. The king has 37 scars. You've carved every one of them in the correct position on every totem. I've checked Lyra. I lined up 15 of the totems your village children surrendered when we sent riders to collect them. Every scar, in the right place, on a face you have never seen. Sarah stood. That is not a coincidence. That is a bond manifesting through the only channel your body had available since your wolf was suppressed. Suppressed? Suppressed, not dead. Maren found traces of Moonsbane in your blood. Old traces degraded but present. Someone dosed you as a child, and they did it long enough to bury your wolf so deep she couldn't manifest. But she found another way out. Through your hands. The room felt smaller suddenly. The air pressed in. Lyra set down her knife, carefully, precisely aligned with the edge of the workbench, the way she aligned everything in her life, because order was the only defense a blind woman had against a chaotic world. Who would have given me Moonsbane? That is an excellent question, Sarah said. and the king is asking it with considerably less calm than I am. The answer came 3 days later, and it came in the form of Beta Hask himself, arriving at Thornhold's gates with a delegation of 6 Ashmere wolves demanding the return of his Pax Omega. Lyra was in her workshop when she heard the commotion. The window faced the courtyard. She recognized Hask's voice, amplified by self-importance, and what she suspected was fear disguised as authority. The Omega Lyra is a ward of Ashmere Pack. She was removed without proper negotiation or compensation. We demand her return under the Treaty of Border Autonomy. Cale's voice came from the rampart above the gate. She had not heard him climb up there. The man moved quietly for someone his size. You demand. The treaty is clear, Your Majesty. Pack wards cannot be removed without the Beta's consent. She is not a ward. She is my mate. An unclaimed mate has no legal status. Until the marking ceremony, she remains a member of her birth pack, and Ashmere claims her. Silence. The courtyard held its breath. Lyra set down her tools and walked to the window. The stone sill was cold under her palms. She could feel the tension below her the way animals feel a coming storm, a pressure, change a hum in the ground. Hask. Cale's voice was different now, not the controlled baritone she had come to know. Something lower, something that vibrated in frequencies the human ear could barely register. You dosed a child with moonsbane to suppress her wolf. You starved her. You confined her to a shed. You allowed your son to bruise her. And now you invoke treaty law to demand her return. Those are unsubstantiated accusations. Marin of Thornhold found the moonsbane traces in her blood 4 days ago. The compound degrades at a known rate. Based on concentration levels, Lyra was first dosed at approximately age 7. The same year she lost her vision. The same year her mother died. The pauses between sentences fell like axe blows. Moonsbane does not cause blindness on its own, but when administered to a child whose wolf is attempting its first awakening, it can cause the body to redirect the wolf's energy in catastrophic ways, including shutting down the optic nerves. The courtyard was absolutely silent. You blinded her, the Alpha King said. You blinded her, and then you spent 16 years telling her she was worthless because she was blind. You have no proof of who administered. Your son Declan told my investigators everything 3 hours ago. It took very little pressure. He is not a brave man, your son. He told us his mother administered the moonsbane in Lyra's food on your orders. He told us you did it because the Pack Seer warned you that Lyra's mother was carrying a wolf of the old bloodlines, a moon carver. You feared the power it would attract. Lyra's hands were shaking. She gripped the windowsill until the stone bit into her palms. Moonsbane. She had been 7. She remembered the fever that took her eyes. She remembered the taste of the broth her mother had fed her, bitter underneath the herbs, and her mother's voice, strained and apologetic, saying the healer had prescribed it. Her mother hadn't known. Her mother had been given the poison to administer to her own daughter, and she had done it, believing it was medicine. Her mother had died of guilt 6 months later. Lyra understood this now with a clarity that felt like being carved open. I am invoking the king's right of inquiry, Cale said from the rampart. Beta Hask of Ashmere, you and your delegation will be detained for trial. The charges are administration of a banned substance to a minor suppression of a wolf's manifestation, abuse of a pack ward, and conspiracy to conceal a bloodline heir. You cannot. The treaty does not protect those who poison children. Take them. She heard the sounds of a scuffle. Brief, perfunctory. Hask's wolves were border wolves. Thornhold's guard were war wolves. It was over in seconds. Then the courtyard was quiet, and she heard bootfalls on the stairs below her window, heavy, measured, unhurried. He came to her workshop door. She could smell the ozone on him, sharper than usual, charged by the confrontation. "You heard," he said. "I heard. I should have told you in private first. I'm sorry." She shook her head. "I needed to hear it the way the world heard it. Not softened, not managed." He stepped inside. She heard him stop near the workbench where her finished totems stood in their rows. 15 wolves, all facing the same direction, all with the same face, his face, every scar in its proper place. "Lyra." His voice was careful now. "The scholars believe that if the moon's bane suppression is fully reversed, your wolf may be able to manifest. Your eyes. Maren cannot promise anything. The nerve damage is old. But there is a chance, a small one." She nodded. Her hands had stopped shaking. She picked up her knife, picked up the totem she had been working on for the healer's daughter, and began to carve. The wood shavings fell like shed skin. "I have been blind for 16 years, she said. "I have built a life in the dark. I can navigate a forest by the texture of the ground under my feet. I can tell a person's mood by the speed of their breathing. I carved your face into hundreds of pieces of wood without ever seeing it." She paused. "If my sight comes back, I want it. But I need you to understand that I am not broken. I am not a thing to be fixed." "I know." "Do you? Because people who discover I'm blind always speak to me like I'm half a person waiting to be completed." He was quiet for a long time. She heard him breathing, slow and steady, and then she heard something she had never heard from him before. A slight roughness at the top of the inhale, the compression of someone swallowing against tightness in their throat. "When I was 19 and became king," he said, "every lord and counselor and commander treated me like an incomplete version of my father. Like I was a draft, and he had been the final copy. It took me 5 years to stop measuring myself against a dead man's shadow." He moved closer. She felt the heat of him. "I do not think you are broken. I think you are the most complete person I have ever met, and I think that terrifies you more than the blindness does." She put the knife down because her hands were not steady enough to carve. He was right. The reversal process took 2 weeks. Maren worked with an herbalist from the northern packs, a woman named Orsa, who smelled like wet earth and crushed herbs, and spoke in a dialect so old that half her words had no modern equivalent. They brewed a counter-compound, administered in drops under Lyra's tongue 3 times a day, and Lyra felt her wolf grow incrementally stronger with each dose. It was not a gentle process. Her wolf had been buried for 16 years, and she woke furious. For 3 nights straight, Lyra's body shook with fever as the wolf fought the remnants of the moon's bane. Her bones ached, her teeth throbbed, her skin felt too tight, as if something underneath was pressing outward, testing the boundaries. Cale stayed. Not in her room. At the door. Every night, leaning against the frame, his scent of pine and ozone drifting in like an anchor in the chaos of what her body was doing. "You don't have to stay," she told him through gritted teeth on the 3rd night when the shaking was so bad the bed frame rattled. "I know. The doorframe is going to have a permanent impression of your shoulder at this rate. It already does." On the 4th night the shaking stopped. On the 5th her wolf spoke. Not in words. Wolves did not speak in words. But a presence unfurled in Lyra's mind, like a flag in wind, vast and warm, and utterly completely enraged at having been locked away for 16 years. The wolf flooded her senses. every sound sharpened, every smell doubled in intensity. She could hear a mouse moving inside the wall 3 rooms away. She could smell the kitchen garden on the far side of the palace, the rosemary and the thyme and the freshly turned soil. And she could smell Cale, not just his scent, his emotions. The pine deepened when he was calm, the ozone spiked when he was angry or aroused, and underneath everything, a thread of something warm and steady like banked coals that was always directed at her. "She's here," Lyra whispered. "From the doorway. I know. I felt her. She's angry. She has reason to be." Lyra's wolf pressed against the inside of her skin, testing, searching, yearning toward the scent in the doorway, and for the first time, Lyra let her. She did not push the feeling down, or rationalize it, or question it. She let the wolf reach toward what it wanted. Cale made that sound again, the low, broken rumble, and she heard his self-control crack just slightly in the way his breath came faster and his fingers gripped the doorframe hard enough that the wood groaned. "Lyra, if you keep, your wolf is calling mine, and mine is not as disciplined as I am. Maybe discipline is overrated. You are going to be the death of me. Probably. You should come inside." He did not come inside. He gripped the doorframe until she heard the wood splinter slightly, and then he said, in a voice so strained it barely qualified as speech, "When you can see me, when you choose me with your eyes open, even if they never work again, I mean with full knowledge and no debt and no obligation, then you are the most stubborn man alive. I am the Alpha King. Stubbornness is in the job description." Her vision did not return all at once. It came in fragments like a mosaic assembling itself. On the 8th day of reversal, she saw light for the first time in 16 years. Just light. A diffused glow through the window that made her cry so suddenly and violently that Maren thought the treatment had gone wrong. On the 10th day, shapes, blurred, soft-edged like looking through water. She could make out the rectangle of the doorway, the dark mass of the workbench, the pale rows of totems on the shelf. On the 12th day she saw color, the warm amber of the beeswax candles, the grey-blue of the stone walls, the white of the birch shavings on the floor. She did not tell anyone. She sat in her workshop and looked at the world with eyes that were still blurred and imperfect, but functioning, and she waited. She was waiting for something specific. On the 14th day, Cale came to her door. His shape filled it the way his scent filled a room. She could see the outline of him now. Tall, broad, dark-haired, as she had somehow always known. He leaned against the frame in what she now understood was his habitual posture, one shoulder braced, arms crossed, head slightly tilted. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Come closer." He straightened. She heard the shift in his breathing. He walked toward her, and with each step the blur resolved slightly, and she saw him. Not perfectly, not in the sharp detail that full vision would eventually give her, but enough to see the jaw she had carved 1,000 times, the brow ridge heavy and angular, the cheekbones sharp beneath skin that was darker than she had imagined, tanned by years of campaign sun. The scar over his left eye, a pale ridge cutting through his eyebrow, exactly where she had always placed it in the wood. His eyes were amber. She had not known that. She had not known what amber was not really not with her own eyes, but the color was warm and steady and contained everything she had ever felt in his scent. Pine forests in late afternoon, embers after a fire, the patience of a man who had leaned against a doorframe, night after night, because crossing the threshold uninvited was not the same as being asked. She was crying. She could feel the tears, but she could not stop looking at him. His face was exactly what her hands had known. Exactly. Every line, every angle, every imperfection. It was like meeting someone she had memorized in a language she had only now learned to read. Lyra. His voice was rough. Your eyes. I can see you. He went still. Not the controlled stillness of an alpha king. The absolute, trembling stillness of a man who has been handed something he was afraid to hold. How long? A few days. I was waiting. Waiting for what? To see your face. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands found her face, both of them, cupping her jaw with those calloused palms, and she could see his eyes up close. Now amber shot through with threads of gold, and they were wet. The Alpha King of the Thornhold Dominion was crying. You're more stubborn than I am, he said. Considerably. He pressed his forehead to hers. She could feel his breath on her lips, his thumbs tracing the lines of her cheekbones, and the mate bond roared between them like a river breaking through a dam. Choose, he whispered, with your eyes open, no debt, no obligation. Choose. She pulled back just enough to see his face clearly. She studied it. This face her hands had known for 12 years. The scar, the jaw, the brow, the amber eyes that held 12 years of waiting in them. I choose you, she said. I chose you before I even knew your name. I carved the choice into birchwood 1,000 times. My hands knew you before my eyes did, and my wolf knew you before my hands did, and I am done questioning something that every part of me has been saying since I was 11 years old. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming kiss, the kind that transmitted intention through every nerve ending that told her body what his wolf already knew. She tasted salt from his tears and the faint bitterness of the morning tea he always drank, and something underneath that was purely him, purely mate, and her wolf surged to the surface with a howl that was not audible to human ears, but resonated through the bond like a bell struck in a cathedral. His wolf answered. She felt it through the bond, a vast dark presence that rose to meet hers with a relief so profound it was almost grief. 12 years. He had waited 12 years. They pulled apart. His hands were still on her face. She could see him breathing hard, his control fraying at the edges, the amber of his eyes blazing brighter than she had thought eyes could be. The marking, he said. The ceremony. The council, the protocols, Sarah's 47 questions. Later. Later, he agreed. But Cale... Yes. I want to finish the totem first. He laughed, a real laugh, the first she had ever heard from him, and it transformed his face in ways her hands had never captured. The sternness broke open. The jaw softened. Lines appeared around his eyes that spoke of a capacity for joy that had been living dormant under all that discipline and grief and waiting. You're going to carve on our wedding day, aren't you? He said, almost certainly. And at the coronation, I'll bring a small piece. No one will notice. Everyone will notice. You will be the Lunar Queen with wood shavings in her hair. Is that a problem? He kissed her forehead. It is the opposite of a problem. The trial of Beta Hask took place in Thornhold's Great Hall 3 weeks later. Lyra attended. She sat in the Lunar's chair beside the king's throne, and she could see the hall now, not perfectly, the edges of things still blurred softly, but enough to see the vaulted stone ceiling, and the iron chandeliers, and the rows of wolves from packs across the Dominion who had come to witness the Alpha King's justice. Hask stood in the center of the hall in chains. He looked smaller than his voice had always made him seem. His shoulders curved inward. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowd for allies, and finding none. Lyra had expected to feel rage when she saw him. She had rehearsed it almost. The man who had poisoned her, blinded her, killed her mother by proxy, and spent 16 years convincing her she was worthless. Rage seemed appropriate, proportionate. Instead, she felt something more complicated. Hask was afraid. He was visibly physically afraid, and she recognized the specific quality of his fear because she had lived inside that same fear for 16 years. The fear of someone who knows they have no power and no allies and no escape. It did not make him sympathetic. He had earned his chains. But the recognition of the fear, the intimacy of knowing exactly how it felt, sat in her chest like a stone she could not swallow. Cale read the charges. His voice filled the hall without effort. The evidence was presented. Declan's testimony given in writing, because Declan had proven unable to speak in his father's presence without breaking down. Maren's medical findings. The herbalist Orsa's analysis of the Moonsbane traces. And then Cale said, "The accused may speak." Hask looked at Lyra. She saw his eyes find hers, and for a moment, one flickering, involuntary moment, she saw something pass across his face that she had not expected. Not remorse exactly. Something closer to bewilderment. He looked at her sitting in the Luna's chair in the clean wool dress Sarah had commissioned for her, with her newly seeing eyes, and her wolf humming just beneath the surface. And he looked genuinely bewildered, as if the reality of what she had become did not match any calculation he had ever made. If the thing he had tried so hard to destroy had grown into something his imagination could not accommodate. "I did what I believed was necessary for the pack's safety," he said. His voice was steady, but thin. The old bloodlines carry power that attracts enemies. I was protecting Ashmere. "You were protecting yourself," Cale said. "A moon carver in your pack would have drawn the attention of the Dominion. You would have been required to report her to the Crown. She would have been elevated above your station. You poisoned a child to protect your own authority." Hask said nothing. His jaw worked. She could see the muscles clenching and releasing. "You are sentenced to exile without Wolf," Cale said. "Your Wolf will be bound by the Thornhold Seers. You will live as the thing you tried to make her, powerless, alone, unable to shift." The hall was silent. Lyra watched Hask's face as the sentence registered. She watched the moment the bewilderment collapsed into something raw and animal. He did not scream or beg. He simply diminished. His shoulders dropped, his chin lowered. He became exactly what he had always feared becoming. She found no satisfaction in it. She had expected to. Every story she had ever heard about justice ended with the villain's punishment being a source of catharsis. But watching Hask shrink was like watching a mirror, and the reflection was not satisfying. It was just true. Afterwards, Cale found her on the rampart overlooking the eastern forest. The wind carried the smell of pine and coming rain. She was carving. She carved when she needed to think, and she needed to think right now. "You did not enjoy that," he said. "No. Neither did I." She paused her blade. "You didn't. I have sentenced many wolves. It has never been enjoyable, necessary sometimes, just often. But enjoyment implies a satisfaction I have never found in watching someone lose everything." She turned the totem in her hands. She was carving something different this time. Not a wolf. A woman's face. Her mother's face, or what she could reconstruct of it from touch memories and the faded impressions her 7-year-old eyes had last recorded. He looked confused, Lyra said, when he saw me in the Luna's chair. Not angry. Confused, like the equation he'd built his life on had given the wrong answer. It had. I know. But the confusion... She trailed off, set the blade back against the wood. He thought he was doing math. He thought if he removed the variable, the problem would solve itself. He was wrong and cruel, and he destroyed my mother and stole 16 years of my life. But in that one moment, he just looked like a man who had never understood the thing he was trying to control. Cale leaned against the rampart wall. Even here, even in the wind, he leaned against things. She was beginning to understand it was not laziness or affectation. It was the posture of a man who had spent 12 years holding himself upright by force of will and had learned to rest his weight wherever he could. "You are more merciful than I am," he said. "I am not merciful. I just recognize the shape of being small." He turned to look at her. She could see his profile against the sky, the strong jaw and the scar and the amber eye that caught the late light. Her hands twitched with the urge to carve him, to capture this exact angle, this exact light. "The marking ceremony," he said. "Sarah has everything prepared. The council has stopped arguing largely because Sarah threatened to resign if they raised one more objection. But I need to ask you. Not as the king, as Cale." She set the totem down on the rampart wall. "Will you let me mark you, the bite, the bond made permanent? Not because the court demands a Luna, not because the Silverpine bloodline should be protected, because I want to spend the rest of my life leaning in your doorway while you carve, and I want the bond to be real. And I want your wolf and my wolf to be bound the way your hands bound us, before either of us understood what was happening." She stood. The wind pulled at her dress. She could see the forest stretching to the horizon, green and dark, and the mountains beyond it blue with distance. She had not seen a horizon in 16 years. The scope of it made her chest ache. "I have a condition," she said. "Name it." "The children of Ashmere, the ones I carved totems for. They're still there with a leaderless pack, and no one making them wolves for their first shift. I've already sent a new beta. The pack will be reorganized under Dominion oversight. That's politics. I want to go back, not to stay, to bring them totems, the ones I carve here. I want to send totems to every pup in Ashmere who is afraid of their first shift. You want to carve wolves for the children of the man who blinded you. I want to carve wolves for the children. The children didn't blind me." He looked at her for a long time. The amber eyes held something she was still learning to read with her new vision. Not surprise, not admiration, something more private than that. The expression of someone watching, confirmation of something they had already suspected, but never dared to believe. "Done," he said. The marking ceremony took place at dusk in the great hall. Lyra wore a dress of deep blue wool, and Sarah had woven birch sprigs into her hair because Lyra had refused flowers. The court assembled. The wolves of Thornhold filled the hall, and their combined presence hummed in her chest, like standing inside a bell. Cale wore black, no crown, no armor, just the simple black tunic of a wolf who was about to meet his mate in the oldest way his people knew. He stood before her. She could see his face clearly now, her vision sharpening daily, and the sight of him still hit her the way his scent had that first day in Ashmere. a wall of recognition, a homecoming to a place she had never been. "Before the bond," he said, and his voice filled the hall without effort. "I want the court to see something." He raised his hand. A soldier brought forward a wooden box. Cale opened it and withdrew a totem. One of hers. A birchwood wolf, mid-howl with his face, his scar, his jaw. He held it up for the court to see. "This woman carved my face into wood before she ever heard my name. She did it blind. She did it hundreds of times for children who needed comfort, never knowing what she was making. Her wolf, suppressed since childhood, found the only way it could to reach mine. Through her hands, through birchwood, through the oldest language wolves have ever spoken." He set the totem on the altar between them. "I am not marking an omega tonight," he said. "I am marking a moon carver of the silver pine bloodline, a woman who carved her way out of the dark." The bite was not gentle. It was not supposed to be. His teeth found the curve where her neck met her shoulder, and the pain was bright and clean and real, and underneath it, the bond exploded open like a dam giving way. She felt his wolf rush into her, vast and dark and achingly relieved, and her wolf rose to meet it with a ferocity that made Lyra gasp. The hall erupted, wolves howling. The sound shook the chandeliers and echoed off the vaulted stone, and Lyra stood in the center of it with the Alpha King's mark burning on her neck, and her wolf finally fully, irrevocably awake. She could see everything, the torchlight on the stone, the faces of the court, some joyful, some awed, some calculating. Commander Sarah in the front row, arms crossed, looking satisfied in the way of someone whose logistics had finally come together. Maren the healer, crying. Councillor Thane, his expression a complicated mixture of resignation and grudging respect. And Cale, looking at her with amber eyes that held nothing back, no walls, no discipline, no carefully maintained distance, just a man who had waited 12 years for a wolf carved in birchwood to lead him to this moment. She reached up and touched the mark on her neck. The skin was hot, swollen, tender. It would scar. She had plenty of experience with scars. This one she chose. The reception went late. Wolves drank and feasted and told stories, and Lyra sat beside Cale at the high table and ate roasted venison with rosemary potatoes, and drank mead that tasted like honey and autumn apples, and her stomach, no longer the shrunken fist Maren had described, handled all of it with the enthusiasm of a body making up for lost time. At some point during the evening, Sarah leaned over and placed something in Lyra's hand, a small, smooth stone, warm from Sarah's pocket. "What is this?" Lyra asked. "A river stone from Kinnock Hollow. I picked it up during the siege, kept it for luck. I've never given anyone a gift, so don't make it a thing." Lyra closed her fingers around it. The stone was smooth and warm and perfectly ordinary, and it was the first gift she had received from someone who was not obligated to give her one. "Thank you, Commander. Do not carve my face into anything. That is my one condition." Noted. Later, much later, when the hall had emptied and the torches burned low, Lyra slipped away to her workshop. The east wing was quiet. The moonlight came through the window and fell in silver rectangles on the workbench, and she could see it. She could see moonlight, and the beauty of it stopped her in the doorway for a full minute. She sat at the bench. She picked up a fresh piece of birch. She picked up her knife. She did not carve a wolf. She carved a woman's face. Her mother, the cheekbones she remembered from touch, the forehead she had pressed her child's face against, the jawline she had traced with small fingers in the dark of those first terrible weeks after the blindness came. The shavings fell like pale ribbons onto the workbench. The wood was warm in her hands. and something happened as she carved that had never happened before with the wolves. She felt her mother. Not a ghost, not a memory. A presence in the wood, the way the grain holds the memory of the tree it came from. Her mother was not in the birch, but the love her mother had carried, the love that had been weaponized against them both by a frightened man, with a small imagination that love was in Lyra's hands, and it flowed through the blade into the wood. Footsteps behind her, the scent of pine and ozone, warmer now threaded with the bond's new permanence. "I knew you'd be here," Cale said. "I'm predictable. You are the least predictable person I have ever met." He stood behind her chair. She felt his hand settle on her shoulder thumb, tracing the mark on her neck. "What are you making?" "My mother." His thumb stilled, then resumed its slow trace. He said nothing. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not offer comfort or platitudes or the careful words people use when they want to help, but don't know how. He just stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder while she carved, and his presence was a doorframe she could lean against. She worked the cheekbones, the brow, the gentle curve of the jaw that was nothing like the angular lines her hands usually carved, and the difference felt right. Not every face she carried inside her was his. Some of them were older, softer, belonging to a woman who had loved her enough to be destroyed by what was done to her. The moonlight shifted as the hours passed. Birch shavings gathered on the floor. Cale eventually sat down in the chair beside her workbench, and at some point his breathing slowed and deepened, and the Alpha King of the Thornhold Dominion fell asleep in a wooden chair in his mate's workshop, with his head tilted back and his mouth slightly open, and his hand still resting on the edge of her workbench, 3 inches from her tools. Lyra set down the finished carving. Her mother's face looked up at her from the birchwood, and for the first time she could see it, really see it. The resemblance to her own face that she had never known was there. The same cheekbones, the same brow. She placed the carving on the shelf beside the wolves. It looked strange there, a human face among all those lupine ones, but it also looked right, like it had always been missing from the collection. She turned to look at Cale, sleeping in the chair. The moonlight caught the scar over his left eye, and she felt the old familiar pull in her hands, the urge to carve, to capture, to hold. But she did not pick up her knife. Instead, she reached out and touched the scar with her fingertip. The real thing was softer than she had ever carved it. The skin was thin over the ridge of scar tissue, and warm and alive. He stirred at her touch but didn't wake. His wolf rumbled through the bond, a low sound of contentment that vibrated in her own chest. She left her finger on the scar. She could feel his pulse beneath it. Steady, slow, strong. The heartbeat of a man who had waited 12 years and would have waited 12 more. Outside the workshop window, the first light of dawn crept along the horizon. The forest was waking up. She could hear the birds starting, hesitant and soft, testing the silence before committing to their full song. She was the lunar queen of the Thornhold Dominion. She was a moon carver of the Silverpine bloodline. She was a blind woman learning to see. She was a daughter finishing her mother's face in birchwood. But right now, in this moment, she was just a woman sitting in a workshop at dawn, touching the face she had known before she ever saw it, while the wood shavings from a night's work curled on the floor around her feet like pale discarded maps to a place she had finally arrived.